what does a physical therapist have to do with migraines? They're debilitating. You've seen just about every provider under the sun. A physical therapist does not come to mind when people have been searching around the world for some relief. So yeah, what I do is I apply a physical therapy approach, meaning looking at movement and function and trying to restore function. And I look at the neck and the jaw and the shoulders. Now, it just so happens that the upper part of the neck in particular, when there's restrictions, when there's joints that aren't doing their job, when there's tension that's built up, and then eventually there's a pain signal from this area. So if you have headaches or migraines, if you kind of push just at the base of your skull, top part of your neck, you're probably familiar with that sensitive area. That area refers pain into the head.
Do you want to wake up feeling like you are stepping into who you are meant to be, into the best possible version of you? What if I told you that the key to your best life, health, and happiness are all around you? You just have to find what works for you. I'm Hope Pedraza, and I believe that there isn't just one way to live a healthy and meaningful life, and that all you need is a little inspiration to make changes that last from the inside out. Each week, I'll be sharing tangible tips and inspirational interviews to help you on your journey. These are the steps to take to improve your life and live with purpose. This is Hopeful and Wholesome. Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. Today I have on the show Dr. Jonathan Taves, and he is the owner of Novera, which is a headache center. And he also is the host of the Headache Doctor podcast. And we are talking all things headaches today because he specializes in relieving headaches and migraines for patients who just don't get enough of what they need from traditional treatments. And he's a physical therapist, and it's not the route you would typically see or that you typically think of when you think of headache relief. But he has got so many things to tell us today about these pieces of root causes that we're just not getting to the bottom to. And he really does believe that everyone deserves a life free of pain and really of unwanted medication. And so take notes on this one if you suffer from headaches or migraines or anything related to that, because he's probably going to tell you some things that you may not have ever heard of how to really treat and get to the bottom of your headaches. So let's jump in. All right, y'all, let's jump in. I'm here with Dr. Taves, and he is the headache doctor, literally has a podcast called The Headache Doctor. And I'm so glad to have him on to talk about this because this is something I deal with, Dr. Taves, with my clients all the time. It's headaches and migraines. It's literally almost every client I work with. So thanks so much for joining me today to talk all about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with I'm like trying to figure out where to start here in the conversation about headaches and migraines. Because literally it's something I talk about every week with my clients. So can you tell me, or just tell the listeners here, what constitutes a migraine? And typically, and this might be kind of a loaded question, like where do headaches and migraines typically start?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. It's a foundational question. I think how that question is answered launches people in one direction or the other. Mm-hmm. And so what I will say is that in the traditional healthcare world, I guess in any setting, a migraine is going to be diagnosed if you have more of a one-sided, throbbing, pounding, debilitating type pain that's accompanied with sensitivities to lights and sounds. Maybe nausea, visual disturbance might be in there, with or without an aura. So having those symptoms puts you in the category of having a migraine. And that's about it, though. That's about as much as a provider would need is really just a list of symptoms.
Just the symptoms, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you communicating that. So it's important for listeners to understand that there's not a lot behind that as far as directing your care or giving you an answer. And that's the problem that leaves people kind of hopeless or what do I do with this? Because this doesn't explain why. I just told you my symptoms and you just sort of gave me a diagnosis back that doesn't really get us anywhere. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's important to understand is headaches, migraines, any sort of head or facial pain, to understand the why behind them, there can be a lot of commonalities. Someone with a migraine, it is important for them sort of personally, emotionally, to be able to communicate in a way that tells others that this is debilitating because you can't really see it. It's not like someone chopped your leg off. And so to have migraines and to use that term, migraine, I think it's important from like a personal patient perspective. How do I communicate with an employer, with my family members, what I have? Right. And that's what I would say the important difference between saying I just have a headache or I have a migraine. That's where it is. Now, what I push up against is migraine being a neurological disorder. Okay. And what I mean by that is not that the neurological system is not involved, but rather that it's not a neurological disease in the sense that the only thing you need is to see a neurologist and take medication that's going to manage like hormones and this neurological response that presents with these symptoms. That's not all there is. There's so much more to it. And so I push up against this idea that it's a neurological disease. With that, a lot of providers will refer to as migraine, which is fine, meaning they take the S off. I feel like that's a little less hopeful than I want to be. So I tell people that the way I communicate is I say migraines because I see them as individual events that can be controlled and managed. It's just what we see in our practice. And so hopefully that's a little bit more hopeful to just sort of change that subtle difference between it's not necessarily this disease that's uncontrollable that leads you down the road of medication. There's a lot of things that you can do to manage your migraines.
Right.
Now, with what I do, I'm a physical therapist, which might be strange for people listening or watching to think, well, what does a physical therapist have to do with migraines? They're debilitating. You've seen just about every provider under the sun. A physical therapist does not come to mind when people have been searching around the world for some relief. So, yeah, what I do is I apply a physical therapy approach, meaning looking at movement and function and trying to restore function. And I look at the neck and the jaw and the shoulders. Now, it just so happens that the upper part of the neck in particular, when there's restrictions, when there's joints that aren't doing their job, when there's tension that's built up, and then eventually there's a pain signal from this area. So if you have headaches or migraines, if you kind of push just at the base of your skull, top part of your neck, you're probably familiar with that sensitive area. That area refers pain into the head. That can be referred to as a cervicogenic headache, but we've seen that area basically the source of all sorts of headaches and migraines. So all sorts of head pain presentations with these accompanying symptoms, we've seen treatment to this area and restrictions freed up in that area be incredibly impactful for these people. And so seeing that over and over again in patient care and over the years, I'm more and more convinced that a very, very high percentage of people with headaches and migraines have a neck problem that's been overlooked.
Yeah.
And that neck problem needs to be managed. And what we do is we try to restore movement, which is another key aspect of the problem of why people are not finding this type of process. Because if you think of a still image like an X-ray or an MRI or a CT scan, it's not showing you movement. It's just showing you this still image, right? And so the information, when we're looking at the body and understanding joints and the musculoskeletal system, and if there's a problem, knowing how it moves is a big deal because our body, we're intended to move throughout the day. And so making a diagnosis and assuming like, oh, the neck is fine after you get an X-ray is leaving off a whole bunch of really important information. And so what we do is we're able to evaluate the neck for these sort of nuanced movement problems. And so the listener might be thinking, well, I can turn my head, I can look up and down, but it's more nuanced than that. The body compensates really well. So a lot of people don't necessarily know that they have this problem. The telltale sign is just if you have pain in your head or face, and there's different presentations that are sort of like more connected to the neck and some that might tell us like there's more than just the neck going on. But we feel like the neck is this sort of underlying theme that's overlooked. And so that's what's led me to be on podcasts like this to try to get the word out.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it is a new kind of way of looking at it. And so I have so many questions about this. As someone who I'm coming from like the movement world myself, like I have a Pilates studio and been doing this a long time, and not that I do physical therapy on people, but I have had physical therapists work for me who do Pilates. Like they can kind of go hand in hand a lot of times. Yeah, totally. And so when we're looking at like the movement piece of it, so when you're talking about like it's the head and neck, is it like a structural thing? Is it like a postural thing? Is it like a fascia thing? Like what exactly is causing the pain to come from the head, the neck? Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it's all of it. I'll put it this way. If you think of life and gravity weighing on our body, our head weighs about 10 to 12 pounds. I'm almost convinced that I'm more surprised if people go through 20, 30, 40 years of life and don't have headaches. That's true. Compared to the ones that do. And so if you think of, so let's take Pilates and movement. And I know that you foundationally and what you're passionate about is getting people moving, right? So if we go through life and we don't move, should we expect in 10, 20, 30 years to have no pain? Right. No, the expectation is like, oh, you're probably going to be screwed up. And that's, I guess at its simplest explanation, without getting into the details, that's what's happening is we aren't moving, or we aren't moving in the patterns that our body really wants us to. We're not using the available range of motion. And a result of that is irritation, whether it's muscles, whether it's tendons, whether it's the joints themselves.
the fascia, all of these structures that make up our musculoskeletal system can be irritated in some way. Now, I would say our approach at its foundation is more focused on restoring joint mobility. So specific joints in the neck, we want to get those moving because in a sense, they'll sort of unlock the muscles to do their job. And then if the muscles are doing their job, then your posture can be more in a neutral position and you can actually get into the range of motion that your body's been trying to get into. But the other element of that is just we want time to be on your side. We don't want it to be against you when it's been against you for however many years.
Right.
Re-educating, implementing good daily habits, changing all those things that are increasing tension in your neck and actually have them be therapeutic now. And a lot of that is just making people aware.
Yeah. And that was going to be my next question, because I know people listening are probably thinking, okay, well, how do I either avoid this from happening and being the 50-year-old who's like, oh, I've moved my neck wrong this whole time. Or they're like, well, crap, maybe that's what my headaches are from. Like, are there ways that we can either like intentionally adjust like our posture, like things that are kind of exacerbating this, or are there things that we can do to keep it from happening or kind of like readjust things in a way, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. And this is why it gets kind of exciting. When I first started my practice, so I'm a manual therapist. I work with my hands. People come into the clinic, I work on them, and it's very one-on-one. I mean, COVID wasn't great because I'm like 6 inches from your face and
couldn't do a whole lot.
It was like, well, what do we do virtually? And then we started working with people virtually, and then in person, in addition to these virtual visits, we realized that there is a lot that people can change in their day-to-day life that really has a substantial impact. And so COVID was a blessing in disguise. We were forced to start working with people virtually. And so what we had to do was educate them, not only on like specific exercises, but on a lot of just these daily habits.
They had to do the work themselves.
Yeah, they did the work themselves. I didn't even touch their neck. And they're like, oh my gosh, my life has changed.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, yeah, I was even surprised by that because my background is like, I got to work on you.
Right.
And so I feel confident in telling your listeners that, just a few basics. The low-hanging fruit is sleep position. So if you think of your neck as, so C1 and C2, the first two bones way up high in the neck, they allow us to rotate our head. About 50% of our motion of rotation comes from C1 and C2. Most people with headaches and migraines have lost that. Okay. So they're not actually rotating through C1 and C2. So if you consider end range rotation as mainly compensation. Now, I'm not telling people to like be afraid of turning your head. So don't hear that. It's good to move. But if you think of sleeping position, if you sleep on your stomach, your neck has to be rotated to one side, maybe, 50 to 90 degrees, whatever it is, because you still got to breathe.
Yep.
That adds a lot of tension to your neck because it's not comfortable with that position because of that joint not being able to do its job. And so if you wake up with headaches in the morning, the first thing we do is talk about sleep position. We don't want you on your stomach. And most people are side sleepers, but I'm going to put most people in a pseudo stomach sleeping position, meaning that they think they're on their side, but they're actually kind of rotated a bit. So if you think of a side sleeper, I would suggest you hug a pillow, put one in between your knees, have your knees together so that you're not turned at all.
Right.
Other important thing is just having a really supportive foam pillow to account for the width of your shoulder. So that's number one, especially if you wake up with headaches or jaw tension, or you just feel like your day gets off to a bad start.
Right.
There's a lot of other things that could be causing morning headaches, but that's where I would start.
Yeah.
In addition to that, it's just incorporating movement into your day. So if you work at a desk, get a standing desk, have your screen at eye level, find ways to take breaks and just go on walks. Walks can be really therapeutic if you're, swinging your arms, if you're getting movement through your upper back, through your shoulders. And the body wants to move and we just need to give it the opportunity to move. Sitting position. So we all sit at some point, especially in the evenings when people relax and decompress and they watch a show or they read a book. That's where people can get in trouble because they feel like intuitively sitting on the couch is therapeutic, but really their body's probably wanting them to be active, to exercise, to move because it hasn't gotten that during the day. And so sitting, especially if you're leaning to one side, reclining, your arms on the armrest or whatever, that curvature in your spine is translating all the way up into your neck. And so if your neck is tight and it doesn't necessarily want to be in this side bent position and you're asking it to, that can be a little bit irritating. So it's kind of these static positions outside of what a neutral posture would be that can be kind of aggravating. The problem is that people don't necessarily realize it. When they're in the moment, it kind of builds. And then, 4 or 5 o'clock rolls around and they're like, oh, why do I have another headache? And it was all those little things that they could have tweaked. So kind of our process or our plan for people virtual, if I was going to boil it down, is we want to talk through all of the different things that you could be doing at home that need to change. And then we want to provide them with sort of a more specific exercise program. So things, how to stretch the shoulders, how to cater to your neck. We want them to be educated on the neck and what's healthy for the neck, because even just having that understanding, people start to think differently throughout their day. And then finally, if needed, we want to help people find a provider in their area. We used to, well, what we've packaged that as is we have health coaching with online courses. So we feel like, across state lines and things like that, we could really help people with headaches and migraines without them having to work directly with me.
Right. Yeah. No, that's perfect. Well, and like you said, I mean, the COVID thing is awesome because you were forced to, like, I don't know if that's when you came up with all this of the courses and everything, but it forced you to have to come up with a way for them to do it on their own. And that's great because the awareness piece is huge. And I find that in, just teaching Pilates. And I've had a lot of clients who come to me from physical therapy, like they finish their physical therapy and then they want to keep, building the strength back up. Mostly it's like knee stuff or hip stuff, whatever. But I find that the biggest piece, and that is the awareness piece. It's just their body awareness, like just for them to like recognize it within themselves. So I think that's a huge piece of the courses that you have, be a huge tool for people to just the awareness piece alone, I think would be really valuable.
Yeah. Like I said, we've just been surprised. We've done this over and over again with people. And I feel like I'm confident saying that our virtual patients are almost having as much benefit as our in-person patients. Obviously, if I had my choice, I'd get people here in person, and we do have people fly out, but it's, that's hard. That's a big ask for people. Yeah. So we want to have at least some product.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's so helpful for people. So there's not, and you're talking about like helping people find providers and stuff like near them. And at least from my perspective, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I feel like there's not a whole lot of providers out there that are coming at it from this angle. And like you were saying before, like you go to the doctor and they're going to, have the list of symptoms, and then more than likely they're just going to give you medication or tell you to take some Tylenol or something. So opening a can of worms here, but I like to do that sometimes. So because you talked about this when I was looking through some of your stuff and some things that you teach and stuff. And I can say this too, from my perspective, coming from like a functional alternative perspective.
Yeah.
But the medical model really does drive kind of some of these things, right? Like the medical model is going to drive, kind of steer you in one direction or another, right? So from your perspective, like how have you seen any like evolution in this and how like other providers are treating, or is it still kind of a small group of providers that are coming at it from this perspective? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So there's a lot of resistance. It's an uphill battle. And I think with a lot of things in life, it comes down to money. And, unfortunately, I guess I don't really love to admit that, but the pharmaceutical industry, and this is true definitely outside of headaches and migraines, but headaches and migraines are a big deal. I think it's the second most disabling disease in the world. And so there's a huge impact on quality of life. And so there's huge opportunity for pharmaceutical companies to provide medications. Yeah, I mean, I could talk a lot about this, but I guess to summarize, medical doctors, they're highly educated and very good at certain things. We, as a culture, give them credit for everything.
Yeah.
Meaning, if anything that has health or your body or an issue with it, it's just assumed you go see an MD. Okay, so that's part of the problem, because if you really understand their training, there's a lot of stuff that they don't know. I mean, ask an MD, let's say a new grad, what should your diet look like? I don't know. No idea. We didn't learn that. And if they did, they maybe had an hour course on it from a nutritionist that came in and then they forgot it. How important is diet to health? Pretty important, right? And so there's a huge gap there. But unfortunately, if you have diabetes and you go to see a medical doctor, they're not equipped to understand or teach you in that process. And so, but there's a resistance to work outside of that. And so that's what I'm experiencing too, is as a physical therapist, it's just intuitive. Like if people have a neck problem that is changing the way they function, and then they're compensating as they do all these movements throughout life, like physical therapists need to be the one interacting with those patients. And the referral pattern from the neck to the head is known. That's not something that's a mystery. That's well studied. But for a medical doctor or neurologist to have a patient come to see them and then refer to someone like me it's almost as if they have to, for lack of a better word, like deny some of their training or I guess humble themselves to say, well, I don't actually know this part of it. But if you think of a neurologist, especially, went through fellowships at whatever prestigious institution. And so it's just hard for them to do that.
Yeah.
There are some very good MDs out there. So I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but I feel like that's the problem. And we could talk a lot more about that. You probably talk about it all the time.
I do. Yes. It's a touchy subject. And again, like you said, and I never want to say it to bash doctors because doctors are important. We need doctors, but there's a time and a place for a doctor. And like acute emergent situations, you need the doctor. You need the guy who can do surgery on you. But for these like chronic things, I can get on my soapbox all day about this. It's just not, quote, fixing anything. It's not getting to the root of the problem. So we're just like putting Band-Aids on it. So I totally get what you're talking about for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's managing symptoms and people get that though. See, that's a good thing. People intuitively know.
Yeah.
I don't think I rarely have I had a patient that comes in and they're like, oh, I love my meds. I know this is what I need for the rest of my life.
Yep.
Believe it or not, I've had that once or twice and I don't know what to do in that situation because it just feels like I don't get that. But people just don't know that there's another option. And so that's more the struggle that we have because it's like, it's 2023 and how do we get this far? And like, no one has figured it out yet.
Right.
And then, I'm over here like, hey, I actually am like curing these people, or at least they're dramatically better. People are naturally kind of skeptical. They're like, well, why haven't I heard of this before? And then it's like, well, how much time do you have? Because the problem's very apparent, but it takes a lot of education. So just because of that resistance, there's not a ton of people in this space. I mean, physical therapists, if you were to just go down the street or do a quick Google search, my guess is you wouldn't find a physical therapist in your area that's doing what we're doing.
Right.
Good manual therapists would probably have a better idea of like how to work on the neck and stuff. And so I still encourage people to find good therapists in their area because it can be very helpful. But most of the patients we see, physical therapists would be somewhat uncomfortable seeing them just because you have to understand physical therapists are trained up in the same system that medical doctors are.
Right.
And so it takes work and probably a little bit of like guts to start pushing against that. And so there's just not too many that are doing it. There's a few around the country, but I feel like the more traction that people like me and you can get, there's a need for it. People are wanting it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's headed in the right direction.
Yeah. No, totally. And I will say as a side note, I've done a few different types of physical therapy, but the manual therapists are like the best. And I was going to one for a while because I did something to my hip but the neck stuff, oh my gosh, I've never really struggled with headaches. Thank God I've never had that issue, but the head neck stuff is like life-changing. And it was just like, they do like the manipulations and they do the adjustments and they do all oh my gosh. So the head neck stuff, I can imagine thinking like if I was somebody who struggled with headaches, like I feel like that the manipulations alone would be like, holy cow, that would have to be just completely life-changing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have someone come in our practice that's had, a decade plus worth of migraines.
Yeah.
Tried everything under the sun. And within 2 or 3 visits, they're feeling better than they have.
That's crazy.
Ever. Yeah. I mean,
That's
our
crazy. Process
is much longer than 2 or 3 visits, but
sure.
But to start feeling relief, I mean, it could be a week away.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's, so it's fun. That's actually why I got into this work because I saw this huge problem in our healthcare system, the prevalence of headaches and migraines, how debilitating they were. And just the fact that I could apply these very conservative techniques to help people, and the improvements they saw were dramatic. So I was like, well, let's figure this out.
I mean, that's huge for people because I have clients, again, like I said at the beginning, literally I'd probably say 80-90% of my clients deal with headaches or migraines, like on some end of the spectrum. And, they've been to the neurologist and they've tried meds. And I feel like so many of them have tried like all the meds, like there's lots of them out there and the meds didn't even work. So, that's huge. And I feel like that is a real mindset shift for people, even people who are open-minded about stuff. I feel like, 'cause it's like, well, how is just like fixing how my head is working? Like that's going to fix my headache. So I do feel like there's like a mindset shift. Of course, it's deeper than that, but that's huge for people because like you said, a lot of times the people who have the migraine, they've been
I have some clients who've had migraines and headaches since they were kids, like 5, 6, 7 years old, which blows my mind. I didn't even know like that was a thing. I mean, it's a really serious, super common issue that people are facing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I would say that now people come to us with all different stories, but one of the more common ones is that they start around puberty, especially females are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience migraines. And so it started when they were a little girl. And oftentimes they have a history, and this is probably 30-40% of people, but oftentimes there's a history of like dance or gymnastics or something that when they're a little girl, like our heads when we're kids are like disproportionately large for our bodies.
Right.
And so you think of our bowling ball weight of a head as adults and, you know, a similar size head as a kid, and our neck's not really developed or stable enough. And then we ask these little girls who are girls, I think there's different reasons, but I think they're predisposed to this or more likely to get it because they tend to have more joint mobility, which in some sense is sacrificing stability.
Right.
And so joint injuries, when you're trying to hold up a 10-pound head on your neck, that's more mobile. And then you ask them to do, you know, cartwheels over and over. We've seen that quite a bit. The problem is that they can compensate. So it might not even be like a huge deal, but it stays with them. And then by the time they're 30 and 40, they walk into our clinic and they're like, you know, we've had migraines, or I've had migraines for 30 years. And, you know, it ebbs and flows. They come, they go maybe. And then they just get to a point of like, typically it's when they have kids and they're like, I can't be a mom and have these. And so they just realize I've got to change something.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I mean, the work you're doing is, I mean, it's incredible. And you're changing people's lives. And this is a total shift, again, like a total shift from mainstream, I don't know if beliefs is the right word, but I guess beliefs about like where headaches come from. And because I know in my world, we talk about hormones and sometimes there's like, you know, mineral imbalances and stuff. We could talk about that. But this structural piece, I feel like is a huge piece that we're missing out. So I love that you're putting all of this together and giving people the opportunity to like learn this piece on their own too with the course and everything. So I love all of that about it.
Yeah. And just to tie it all together. So it's not as if us being a physical therapy clinic that focuses on the neck, don't hear me say, because I know on your podcast, like functional medicine, understanding diet, like hormone balance, those things are incredibly important to us. And the reason that we can have both and everything work in unison is because that's how the body functions.
Exactly.
And so if your hormones are off, we want to solve that problem, not us directly, but we want to help you find someone. And then functionally with functional medicine, like we have people that come in with high levels of inflammation and there's signs that we see that, and like mast cell activation, all these different diagnoses. And we send them out to a functional medicine doc and we say, your threshold for pain is like so incredibly low that I have to get you perfect.
Right.
And like perfect is really hard to do. And so we need to get your inflammation under control, or we need to get your hormones under control because you're just having these monthly migraines and we've helped 70% or 80%, meaning the migraines outside of your cycle are gone. But when your period hits, it's like, watch out. And so we want to help solve that problem too. And so it's been fun for us to just, as we do what we do, we naturally meet people like you where we're just partnering and figuring out like new connections so that, you know, we know where to send people.
Yeah, totally. Well, and like you said, I mean, the body is not an island. Like you can't isolate one thing without treating all the things. So like you said, I mean, you have to adjust all of it. So I love that it comes together. It all comes together. I love it. So I do have one more question I want to ask you that I like to ask everybody before we finish, but can you let everybody know where to find out more about you and about your clinic and where they can find out more about the courses and stuff that you offer?
Yeah. So our website is noveraheadachecenter.com. And actually what we'll do is we have a 10% off if people want to buy the masterclass.
Okay.
They just use the promo code WHOLESOME.
Perfect.
And 10% off the masterclass. The masterclass is available for purchase whenever. So right after they listen to the podcast, they can go on our website and purchase. There's coaching that they can add to that. So that's the accountability, some more specific instruction, things like that. They can find me. So I'm active on TikTok. I got a pretty good following under the Headache Doctor. And then our Instagram and Facebook is Novera Headache Center. So that's Novera, like New Era. And then the Headache Doctor podcast is a platform that people find incredibly helpful. And so I would say if you're really wanting to know more, the Headache Doctor podcast is probably the place to find it in addition to our website.
Yep. Lots of good information there, y'all. So definitely go check that out. And of course, I'll put links to all that in the show notes. I'll put the promo code so you can go get the masterclass and learn you something about getting rid of your headaches. The last question I want to ask you is, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
Oh man. I tell people all the time that we want time to be on your side. We don't want time to act against you. My job, if I'm going to give like this overarching 10,000 foot view, is teaching people how their body was intended to move and then moving in an intentional way so time is on your side again. Everyone's going to age. Perfection's not the goal. Having 100% mobility in your neck is not the goal. It's changing your mindset so that you feel empowered to take these little steps every day that are actually healthy for you. They don't even have to be dramatic changes, but little things throughout your day to put time on your side is what I would say.
I love it. It's perfect. Such good advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Taves, for sharing all this and giving people another option to explore to help with headaches and migraines. This is really great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Hope.
Thanks for listening to Hopeful and Wholesome, y'all. If you found value in this week's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review to let me know what you thought. I love to know what you find useful in these episodes so I know how I can provide the most value I can to my listeners. And if you have topics that you want to know more about, I'd love to hear those as well. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. It's at @TheHopePedraza, or visit my website, hopefulandwholesome.com. Thanks, y'all.